Good morning once again. It's Tuesday, January 26th, and we are continuing with our study in the book of 1 Samuel, and we are still talking about David. And on Tuesday, the title is More Disappointments. We see in 1 Samuel 25 verse 1, a great event occurred, which was really a disappointment for the people of Israel because they most needed guidance and security, and then Samuel died. And all Israel lamented and mourned him. They had not realized what they were doing when they asked for a king. And so when they had Saul as a king and saw how he behaved, and they still didn't think of him much of him as a king. They actually depended more on Samuel for his counsel and for prayers and for connecting them to God. In fact, I'm going to read this paragraph because I think it's very good. It was when the nation was racked with internal strife, when the calm, God-fearing counsel of Samuel seemed to be most needed, that God gave his aged servant rest. Bitter were the reflections of the people as they looked upon his square resting place and remembered their folly in rejecting him as their ruler. For he had so close a connection with heaven that he seemed to bind all Israel to the throne of Jehovah. It was Samuel who had taught them to love and obey God. But now that he was dead, the people felt that they were left to the mercies of a king who was joined to Satan and who would divorce the people from God and heaven. So we are seeing here how the people had actually realized what they had lost by rejecting him as their ruler. And after they had been led by Samuel, they really were regretting their choice. So as the people contrasted the course of Saul with that of Samuel, they saw what a mistake they had made in desiring a king. The very, very first king that they got was a great disappointment to Israel. The people felt now that God was forsaking them. The king seemed little less than a madman. Justice was perverted and order was turned to confusion. So they could not depend on this king. He was not trustworthy. He could not make proper decisions, and everything was total chaos. So the Israelites were really feeling very insecure with the leadership of Saul, and yet Samuel had just died. So it was a very great disappointment for the people of Israel. And moving further, we also see that David also learned about the death of Samuel, and he mourned deeply. He could not attend his burial for obvious reasons because he was being sought by Saul. And so what he did was look for a place of more security, and that's why he went to the wilderness of Paran. And he knew that somehow, even if Saul was following him and trying to kill him, he was still restrained by the fact that Samuel was alive. And now he knew that Samuel was dead, and there was nothing to stop Saul from going after him. So he was really feeling unsafe, and that's why he went to a more secure place in Paran. But something turned out really good in Paran because he composed the book of Psalms 120 and 121, and it's really a beautiful book. Most of the Psalms that David composed in the book of Psalms are really, really beautiful, as seeking, trusting in the Lord as his refuge and always praising the Lord. And we are going to just read a few passages from Psalms 121, 2 to 8. It says, "My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore." So it's a song, it's a psalm of praise and trust, because he knew that the only one he could trust and get help from was the Lord. So it was a time when he also, in the last section, where he met the young men who were taking care of sheep that belonged to a very rich man called Nabal. So David and his men put it upon themselves to protect the sheep. It had come to sheep shearing season, and it was a season of blessings and of sharing. And so after the young men took back the sheep, David sent his men to ask for provision for his own men from Nabal. And he actually mentioned what he had done for Nabal. But from the verses, we understand that Nabal was actually very rude, and he actually asked David, he actually asked, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? And that's in 25 verse 10, where it says, and Nabal answered David's servant and said, who is David and who is the son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away every man from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my flesh that I have, kill for my sharers, and give it unto men whom I know not whence they be? So he already had been told what David had done for his young men who was taking care of the sheep, and yet he answered in a very rude way and wasn't even grateful. But that actually was a test for David, because, like you're talking about more disappointments. Again, David was disappointed because he expected Nabal to respond in a grateful way, but that's not what happened. And of course, he was very angry, and he reacted, and he was getting ready to go and kill Nabal. And so here we see David had reacted in a spirit that Saul had. This was not the spirit that David had. A vengeful spirit was not his spirit. And so he was taking on the spirit of Saul, of going to revenge. So we see that sometimes that's a test that he almost failed. So tomorrow we are going to see what happened as he was going over to Nabal with his men. We're going to see what happened in that time. But basically, the subject about more disappointments was showing that if David had not depended on the Lord in many ways, he could have become like Saul eventually. So it's I thank God that he didn't turn into that kind of a person. And so I hope we got some insights from this paragraph, and also think about what we have now, what you have in your hand. Like, do we appreciate what we have now? And then, because when you lose it, then you'll be like, I wish I knew. And that's what happened to the people of Israel. So we don't want to lose something as precious as how they lost the time they had with Samuel, and then they had a king who they were regretting. So I hope you are blessed. Have a good day, and see you tomorrow.